our first speaker of the day, Dr. Hulya Emir-Farinas. She's a phenomenal data scientist and a very inspirational speaker whom I've known for many years. She's a senior staff research scientist at Google, and she leads the research at the intersection of machine learning, behavioral health, and healthcare. And today she will talk to us about all those three topics combined. Without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Hulya. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashmi, for that nice introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you like-minded individuals sharing some of the work that we've been, things that we've been working on. Before I start, I wanted to tell you a little bit about me. I'm the technical lead for behavior change research at Google Consumer Health Research team. Wearables technologies is what we find interesting, and our mission is to help everyone in the world become healthier. Just in case some people in the audience may not be familiar with Fitbit and the types of data that it generates, I just wanted to give you, I can see people pointing at their Fitbits, which is nice to see. The types of data we have access to, of course, people know Fitbit for their ability to track activity or steps, the intensity of the exercises that you do, the types of your exercises, how sedentary you are, but it is so much more. We also have quite a bit of information about individual sleep, when it starts, when it ends, the quality of it, overall sleep architecture, how much time you spend in deep sleep, REM sleep, wake after sleep onset, or biphasic sleep, any kind of fragmentation the user may be experiencing, and a large number of health metrics. Their resting heart rate variability, SpO2, skin temperature, respiration rate. We have electrodermal activity data that tells us a little bit about body responses, so some area around stress detection. So a lot of interesting data. And my focus is behavior change. Behavior change cannot be learned in a lab. If you were to ask people whether or not they would change their behavior if they were to be exposed to a particular feature, they would almost always say, of course, yes. But that's never the truth. So what we do, what we're very lucky about, is that we have these very engaged users. In addition to logging their food intake, moods, blood glucose levels, making friends with each other, building communities, they also respond to some requests that come from the research team. And we recruit participants, we build our machine learning driven interventions, and then create a prototype, a special experience for them, and then measure the efficacy of the intervention, so that we'll be able to integrate the feature into the original product. So that is really exciting, the opportunity to run these kinds of experiments at a scale. So in today's agenda, I just want to first convince everyone that this is an interesting thing to study. This is an important thing to study, and it is difficult. It's a complex problem to solve. I also want to talk a little bit about how to take advantage of machine learning in this particular domain, and then just share some common mistakes in the application of machine learning in behavior change and how we can detect them, identify them, and avoid them. So for such an upbeat conference and a talk, I'm going to start with something rather morbid. According to CDC, every year 900,000 Americans die prematurely from 5 leading causes. And according to their own estimates, some of those deaths are preventable. And these are really rather conservative estimates, actually. They're not taking into consideration the epigenetics, etc. But this is the most conservative estimate. Like 20 to 30% of premature deaths can be prevented. And when you look at what are some of the modifiable risk factors are, regardless of the condition that you're studying, some things start showing up, like lack of physical activity, having a poor diet, sleep deficiency, tobacco and alcohol use, and maintaining healthy weight are identified as the top risk factors. By the way, if you are to think that maybe this is an American-only problem, That's definitely not the case. World Health Organization actually put together a report last year talking about only one of those modifiable risk factors, lack of physical activity, to quantify how big of an impact it will have on the societies, what it will cost to the economies, and to human life, which is even more important than that. So this is a global problem that we're dealing with. So this seems like it's a clear thing. We should do more of those things. What is stopping us? There is a challenge here. Health behavior change is hard and largely an unsolved problem. So study after study that show that modification of existing habits, making lifestyle changes, is a hard thing, even for an individual who's getting a life-threatening diagnosis for the very first time. 75% of people who are diagnosed with a brand new heart condition, for instance, have a hard time quitting smoking. These are complex issues. Even though we know it is good for us, we have a hard time doing them. So when you have such a hard problem, when you have a problem, if you were to solve it, it's going to save economies, billions of dollars, going to save lives. Clearly, the solution is not going to be something trivial, something easy, right? It's going to require some multidisciplinary approach. And in our research team, we think that at the very least, 3 disciplines need to be presented. Health sciences. We need to have an understanding of the latest in the cardiovascular, metabolic, mental health, and knowledge of latest research in the wellness and chronic care management. Second, of course, machine learning. You need personalization, and you need smart solutions, and that can only you can get it with machine learning. And then behavioral science, which is the area that is most often neglected, like an understanding of how people make decisions, behavioral economics principles. Let me give you an example of how these disciplines can work together. From the clinical side of the house, we could have an understanding of what kind of physical activities to promote for people who have prediabetes, for instance, so that they can have a better glycemic control. Then we can have an understanding of what are some of the most common inhibiting factors among prediabetics that will stop them from doing these things. So suppose the behavior is we want them to have a brisk walk 5 times a week, for instance. Maybe they're having a hard time fitting fitness into their schedule. That may be what is stopping them. Would it be possible for us to use their physical activity, historical physical activity, to understand when are the times that they're most likely to do physical activity? If you have this kind of information, for instance, so suppose that the data science gives us that. The last mile is how we use this information, right? If we were to know this, what kind of intervention would this information enable? So maybe if we were to have some sort of nudges, if they're very unlikely to move at all, we would just censor those, because clearly they're not going to be able to act on it. They have meetings, they have childcare, this and that, so it's impossible. If they're going to be active already, maybe that's not the time for us to nudge them. We're subsidizing the base. They were going to move anyways. But that gray area, when they are likely, when they're able, but they don't always take advantage of, is an interesting area for us to explore. We could use it in that particular fashion. Or maybe we would just help them. Study after study shows us that prompt to make a plan, for instance, help us reduce the gap between the intention and behavior. So maybe it will help. We will use this information algorithm to create a workout scheduling, workout plan. And the behavior could be completely different. So maybe, again, we're interested in the metabolic health, but we're trying to change some sort of a sleep behavior. So clinical side tells us that if we were to change the sleep behavior of this individual, they're going to have better glycemic control. And then the data science will be able to identify what exactly one issue that they should be working on. Should it be adjusting their bedtime, their chronotype, or is it reducing the variability in their bedtime? Or is their sleep too shallow, or is it fragmented? Do they have sleep maintenance issues? Is it hard for them to fall asleep? Based on that understanding, we could create an intervention. Maybe their heart rate is not going down enough, for instance. Non-dipping of the heart rate during sleep is an issue. So our own studies are showing that if a user is to engage in mindfulness activities prior to going to bed, their heart rate is going to go down. So how do we present this information to the user? Creating a compelling, interesting experience is also requires some input from the behavioral science. So the sad news is when it comes to behavior change, there is really no size fits all. So everyone has different promoting and inhibiting factors. For physical activity, for instance, they may be exercising because they have the social support, and they already have the joy of movement. But maybe the inhibiting factor is the poor understanding of the health impacts or time management. So whatever solutions we build, we're attempting to reduce the inhibiting factors and promote the promoting factors. So also, there is no size fits all for behavior change because users have different responses to different types of tools. Some people are more do-it-yourselfers, so they take pride in being able to make these decisions themselves. So if that's the case, they would rather have more light touch type of stuff. Maybe a nudge here, there, or presenting of the information, allowing them to make their own decisions. Others are more comfortable being in a structured environment where they know where they're going, what they need to do next, and then what the outcome is going to be if you are able to tell them. Some people respond to gamification of the ideas. Others, not so much. This is a serious business. Or health coaching. Some people would rather have a relationship with a person or a thing to interact with. So I'm just going to use only one of those, or one or two of those tools to see what role machine learning will play in those. Context-aware insights. So the theory we have is that receiving data-driven feedback on the behavior in a compelling manner, it's highlighted because that matters so much, will lead to behavior change. If you were to know that your sleep is poorer than your peers, people in your age gender group, that will lead to some sort of a change. And monitoring it over time is also meaningful. So in a situation like that, what role could machine learning play? First of all, the discovery of those relationships. I mean, Fitbit has billions of nights of sleep from millions of users, longitudinal data. That's an amazing amount of data that wasn't available prior. So making these kinds of connections is an opportunity. So machine learning allows us to do that. And then sometimes connecting at the same time, like understanding some sort of a deviation, and this deviation is important enough to get the user's attention. For instance, could be another application of machine learning. We want to make sure that we're not too chatty and not too interrupting them too often. And then, again, on the presentation side of the equation, there is also a role for machine learning. So a recommendation algorithm to pick the right insight to present. And a single night of sleep, a single day, a single week is going to produce so many different insights. But which one of those do we want to talk to the user about? Is it a problem that machine learning can address? So in this example, for instance, we're saying that the last week you were awake for 20 minutes more than usual, and if you continue experience difficulty sleeping, try Fitbit's Relax app. So we're just presenting the intervention at a moment that might be most relevant. Or it is really a good, can you hear me? It is also good for us to be able to highlight a blind spot a user may have, right? They may feel like they're doing all the right things in their nutrition, but we may be able to identify an area of improvement. Like your breakfasts tend to be low in protein, and what it would do to them could be an opportunity for us to highlight. And activity, again, an opportunity to say, like, your steps are high in your age and gender group, but the intensity is lacking. Let's work on that together. So an insight is a great way for us to just highlight something, an observation that we're making about users' data and tell them how best to address it. And sometimes we may not have all the answers. This is something that I'm extremely passionate about. Sensors cannot tell us everything. Like at one point, maybe it will, but until then, we really need to conspire with the user so that we can do some troubleshooting. So a person's sleep duration may not change, but their sleep architecture may change. So they're getting less deep sleep, for instance. Something about their sleep environment may be the cause of it. So inviting a user to think about what that might be is an interesting experience and can lead to change in behavior, right? Maybe they have a brand new pet. Maybe something about this sleep environment changed. It's warmer than usual, it's colder than usual, etc. We don't necessarily know all of those things to be able to say something interesting to the user or provide value. And then nudges, it is such a privilege to be on a user's wrist. We're with them all the time. So there is an opportunity for us to intervene. A well-timed, a well-phrased nudge, for instance, will change behavior. We could be more context-aware, right? What the user is up to, how they're feeling, whether or not they're available, and then present these insights to the users. So one good strategy in behavior science is anchoring. So the user already has some sort of a routine, and then adding new behaviors to that would be an easier path, as opposed to establishing something that is not compliant with their lives. So like telling them, such great weather, how about walking a bit further for your lunch, could inspire a person. But we better be sure that the weather is actually good. Or social proofing tends to work on some individuals, right? To telling them that all the cool kids are up to this. You're falling a little bit behind. Is an interesting strategy. Not everyone responds to that, so it is machine learning algorithms' responsibility to identify the subpopulation for whom this intervention would work best. Or some people are very driven by health outcomes. What is it that I need to do, and what is it that I'm going to get? Tell me how long it will take for me to get there. And then sharing established science with them would be an interesting approach. Triggering loss aversion. Are you guys familiar with loss aversion? So I see a few behavior scientists nodding. So it's earned status, for instance. People would not want to let go of that. So would it be possible for us to inspire consistency in behavior by just suggesting that if you were to move a little more, you're not going to lose your status. The streak is going to continue, type of anticipatory thing might be interesting. And challenge personal belief. The belief may be something like, I don't have time to exercise. Would it be possible? What is the best way for us to challenge that kind of belief? The belief may be that they're a poor sleeper. And this is really interesting because whenever we study the perceptions and the actual objective measurements of the behavior, we see that for physical activity, it is aligned. Right? People tend to see other people walking or being active, so they have a good understanding of whether or not they're doing well. but we don't see each other sleeping. So it is something mysterious. We don't necessarily know, and usually these are misaligned, especially for people who have insomnia. The only other people who we observe sleeping could be our parents, and a lot of the sleep-related issues could be genetics. So a person may have really poor sleep, biphasic sleep, and never realize that there is an issue to solve. So sometimes a nudge would only just change the mindset. Like, this is good sleep. This is excellent sleep, for instance, does the job. There are some researchers at Stanford who study that mindset and how big of an impact it has on actual measurable health without really changing the behavior. Just thinking that you're doing enough, you're doing some things that are good for your health is an intervention by itself. So I also wanted to spend a few minutes to talk about how we can avoid some common mistakes in the application of ML in behavior change. I really hope that I convince everyone that it is really important that we study the right problem, right? It's user-driven. Like, what is the critical user journey? What are some of the promoting and inhibiting factors? Would it be possible for us, our technology, our intervention, to eliminate that inhibiting factor? So these are important considerations for the success of the overall project. Like, no matter how accurate your model is, if it is not something that's going to result in the behavior change, for instance, that's not necessarily a good use of anyone's time. And I also see that sometimes people get too excited about a particular technology, particular modeling approach, and attempt to solve the problem using that alone. I think we really should let the use case to dictate what modeling approach we should be using. And for behavior change, there is a lot of data, as I mentioned, right? Like billions of nights of sleep, millions of individuals, etc. But sometimes you don't have any labeled data. I think this is the stage of any machine learning project life cycle is where you can show the most creativity. So you can identify some proxy data, you can rely on modeling approaches that do not require any labeled data. So there is a lot of creativity to demonstrate at the beginning of the project if you don't have any labeled data. And another mistake is not running properly controlled experiments, especially when an intervention has multiple components. You want to be able to say that the benefit actually came from the algorithm, so proper attributioning of the effect to the intelligence that the algorithm provided is an important thing. And I sometimes see these types of problems, like all the benefits being attributed to the algorithm. So you want to be able to run a properly controlled experiment to be able to say, this is doing something extra. And also pay attention to the ethical consideration, making sure that whatever interventions that we're putting out, in wearables in general, making sure that we're measuring things right for everyone, for instance, is important. Like Fitbit has all kinds of like regulated features too, like AFib detection, resting heart rate, tachycardia, like elevated heart rate, low heart rate, bradycardia type of stuff. So making sure that these are equitable, fair for everyone is important. In the case of behavior change, even deciding on what you study, whose problems you're aiming to solve, is important, right? You just want to make sure that you're solving the largest number of users' issues. And then also not tricking them into being healthier, because they really want to. The biggest issue is the intention to behavior gap. So conspiring with them, allowing participatory decision-making, not taking autonomy away from them, for instance, are important things that I care about. With that, I think we're going to move to the questions.
Thank you very much, Hulya, for a very insightful presentation. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions from the audience. First, I will start with questions we have, the ones that were submitted on Slido already. Here's a question. What is a better strategy to scale behavioral interventions that work, like meds adherence or vax campaigns, or design new solutions for bigger challenges?
Ooh, why not both? I mean, if we know that a strategy is universally good, and then it will actually change a lot of people's behavior, I see that there is benefit in that. But I also appreciate creating a library of interventions to make sure that we are building a clever system that will present the right intervention to the right person. So there are certain things for one-time behaviors. There are certain interventions that they work well, but for everyday decisions, just think about it. We make hundreds of decisions in a single day that has an impact on our health. So Netflix CEO apparently at one point said that their biggest competition is sleep. So it is true, that's what we're competing with, right? You want to binge on your favorite show, but your health is also at risk. Not just the short term, like you'll feel crappy the very next day if you don't get enough sleep, but accumulation of that sleep that has all kinds of health issues, right? You're more at risk of developing chronic diseases, longevity-related concerns. So there needs to be something that convinces the person to make their sleep a priority. And sometimes it's reminding them of that future state, but there is hyperbolic discounting, like, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Those are some of the cognitive biases that we tend to work on. So if there was a universally good solution to get people in bed at the right time, for instance, I will be all for it. But in my experience, those types of behaviors that we want to change, that people do every day, different people respond to different things. So I would rather us have a library of things and then use the one that is going to work best.
Thank you. Also a reminder, there's mics around the audience, so if you from the audience want to ask a question, you can also raise your hand, and people will reach you in a minute. Next, another question we have, a very interesting one, says, shame tends to detract people from taking action on behavior change. How do you factor that into your research, such as people feeling judged by their devices?
Oh, that's an excellent point. And it is one that we actually think quite a bit about, because there's certain things that you do, and there is a presentation of, like, that was a good night of sleep. There's a score. Is that necessarily the best presentation of that information? Yeah, it is something that we care about. We don't want to create a nocebo effect, like the opposite of placebo, just something constantly telling them that they're not moving enough, they're not getting enough sleep, could also be detrimental to the user's health. But you also want to inform them. So you just want to be truthful in your presentation of the data, but you also at the same time want to be motivating, celebrate small successes, any improvement in their behavior or health is a reason for celebration. Or simple education, if they have a particular goal, how long it will normally take for them to get to that particular point, for instance, is a good, excellent question.
Thank you, Hulya. I'd like to open it up to the audience here for questions, if you have any.
So many.
You'll see a mic behind you there.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a question. I guess, Google is not just doing this for like a good cause, right? I guess, let's say if someone has sleeping issues and you know about that, you gathered information, you could see this person as having being a great target for, let's say, some advertisement and selling sleeping pills. So how do you manage this conflict of interest?
There is really no conflict whatsoever because of the commitments that we made to the EC. None of the Fitbit data goes into the ad side of the business. So Fitbit is self-contained. The data there only stays there. So it's not for Google to use for their ad business. Does that answer your concern?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for such an inspiring talk. My question is about the interplay between states of vulnerability and states of receptivity. If you can tell us a little bit more about how you handle that, like maybe from a technical perspective or an interesting example. I know that is something very difficult to get right.
Can you tell me a little more? What do you mean by that?
States of vulnerability is when an individual is vulnerable. For example, they're very hungry and they're going to break their diet. And when they're receptive, states of receptivity is when they're receptive to change. Mm-hmm. So how do you handle that balance?
So we want to make sure that the types of interventions that we have will take advantage of when they're receptive. Like if it is requiring some sort of a planning for the week, then we want to make sure that we present those kinds of things at the moments they are likely to. Some of those things are not necessarily knowable to us, right? But when they're most vulnerable, I don't think we've solved that problem yet, right? Especially around like meal detection, teaching them intuitive eating at the right moment, teaching them the difference between hunger and starvation kind of stuff. Or those are excellent things for us to study. I wouldn't say that we have solved it. But you're absolutely right. When a person is seeking, for instance, one of our programs to see what kind of workout they're interested in doing in the next week, clearly the motivation is high. We want to be able to take advantage of that, make sure that they make some sort of a commitment when their motivation is high. But in the moments of weaknesses, when they're vulnerable, we're there, detecting it, making sure that we are able to respond to it. It is something we should be studying. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Maybe I can have another one since we're
Of course. Yeah.
Thank you so much. From a technical perspective, I'm curious if you're using for experimentation the MOST framework.
What is that?
Multi-phase optimization technique. When you study each of the components that go into an intervention, because as you said, there can be many of them.
Sure.
Behavioral and social components, give them a group or not, and so on and so forth. So each of them, they have an impact, but maybe all of them together can hurt.
Yeah. I mean, a careful study design solves some of those issues, so make sure that we have multiple cohorts and different people are exposed to different aspects of the intervention, and we have a proper control that knows that they're being observed but not getting any experience at all. Those kinds of things we definitely care about. But sometimes even within the cohort, if we have any questions, that's after the study analysis, a multivariate statistical analysis usually helps us tease out what is it that they actually responded to. So some of those questions we are trying to be preemptive and make sure that this proper study design will be able to answer a lot of the questions that we're going to have later, but others we just address them after the fact. And if there are still unanswered questions, we have willing people who want to run experiments with us, so we just start a brand new one. Thank you.
Thank you, Hulya. I'll ask one last question from Slido here. So diet, weight, and alcohol or tobacco use cannot be captured automatically with a Fitbit. Mm-hmm. How do you change your research and engage non-engaged users?
It is tough. We are limited by what it is that we can actually tell. For nutrition portion, usually we try to reduce the friction so that they'll be able to share their consumption with us. For something like alcohol, the only example that I can think of is allowing people to run an NO1 experiments on themselves, which was an interesting thing that we did. So we have enough data to establish their baseline. This is what your sleep looks like, your heart health looks like, and then allowing them to say, what would happen if you were to stop drinking alcohol? And so that they'll be able to make a data-informed decision. But you're absolutely, and then they were able to see that, oh, my sleep is so much better. Look at what happened to my resting heart rate. Whether or not that kind of information convinces them to stick with the behavior, I don't know. But it is possible with the kind of data that we collect for us to be able to create a story. So this is what I did for 28 days. Here is what happened to my heart kind of storytelling. That is the biggest challenge. Some of the behaviors that we're interested in influencing are not passively tracked. And when we do, I think that will be a game changer.
Thank you very much, Hulya.
Thanks.
A big round of applause for you for all your time and effort here.
Thanks. Thanks, Rashmi.